Floridians, when you hear a hurricane is coming, do you ever walk outside and wonder, is that huge tree next to my house ready for these winds? On today's show, I'm interviewing Austin Tollman with Word of Mouth. He is an arborist in town. Austin, welcome to the show.
Jack, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
So, to kick it off, I want you to tell me what an arborist is, and then I want to tell the story of how this podcast came to be.
Sure. So, generally speaking, an arborist is going to be really anybody that has experience in the field and practices pruning, tree removal, diagnosing trees, but there's a fine line between an arborist and a certified arborist. So when you're speaking certified arborist, that's somebody that has been tested on a baseline level of tree pruning, removal, diagnosing, and tree practices in whole. It's very important to know the difference between the two when you're bringing somebody on your property.
Good to know. And to tell the story of how this podcast came to be and why I was so excited to film it, if I'm not mistaken, my broker gave me a call one day and he said, Jack, you have to shoot a show with Word of Mouth Tree Service. My neighbor just called your father to come out to the house, and I believe just to remove a tree. Your father showed up there, assessed the tree, and actually convinced the homeowner that he would be making a mistake by removing this tree, and convinced him it's much more valuable for you to preserve and take care of this tree than just have it removed, and successfully the tree remains. Right. And it was when my broker told me that where I went, oh, these are exactly the people I like to have on this show, because it's putting the client's best interest before your own. It may be talking you out of a sale, but it's really what the professional in this space should be doing. So let's start with probably one of the biggest topics in your world is preparing for hurricanes. What should homeowners be doing to prepare for the storms?
Well, the first thing you want to do is you want to get out your local certified arborist. I always recommend bringing out a local certified arborist, only because most of the time when you establish a relationship with that arborist, they're going to be tending to your trees from here on out, especially if they do a quality job. So that's the number one thing I would suggest to do. And you get them out, and even if they're just doing a basic assessment on your trees, sometimes it doesn't mean anything needs to be done, but just getting them to walk the property, look at your tree canopies, see where things might be heavy, check out the root plate of the trees, the problem areas, whether you might have dieback or tree stressors of some degree, and just get an overall assessment on the tree before any work's done. But it gives you a good idea of how ready you are prior to hurricane season.
Yeah, and it's funny because just last week, I think I sent you 3 clients that actually, I didn't think of it. They reached out to me first and they went, hey, storm season coming. We have some trees that are close by. What should we do? And I'm like, I don't know. I'm the real estate guy. And I said, sure. Hey, do you mind, as a favor, do you mind going out, inspecting and seeing, making recommendations on what they have to do and what they may want to think about doing? And then came to learn, you went, the first step, everyone get an inspection on the property. And as far as, so for example, my house in Winter Park, actually one of the reasons I bought it in 2012 was I grew up in town. I saw trees fall. This property did not have any trees within reach. And in my young brain, I went, granted, it's been very effective at keeping trees off the house. And as I've gotten older and kind of learned to appreciate the tree canopy more, now I go, it's a little bit sparse. Yeah. So for someone who didn't do what I did, and they have, where would you say if someone has a tree within reach of their house is probably the standard that someone should have to go, I should have an arborist out?
Sure. So the number one thing when we're inspecting a property as an arborist, you're looking at safety, okay? Before aesthetics, before you're getting into the overall look of the house or the landscape, we're looking at safety. So that when I approach a property, the first thing, I'm getting a feel for the customer's main concerns when it comes to safety, okay? And generally, that is going to be when you do have limbs that are over top of the house or trees that are close to the house. My biggest thing that I preach to my customers is it's okay to have that overhang. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
It's just all the heavy weight you don't want associated with that. Okay. So for us, it's not to go in and flat wall all the limbs off your house or remove every tree that's within proximity to your house.
Mm-hmm.
It's to go in there, alleviate the weight, called weight reduction pruning,
Mm-hmm.
pull things back and make them safer for the home. And it also provides, benefits to your air conditioning unit, keeping everything cool inside the house, so on and so forth. So like I said, I can't emphasize that enough, to allowing your trees to keep their canopies.
Mm-hmm.
You're just making them safer.
Yeah, and that's prioritizing the thicker branches, or is...
Well, and that kind of tangents into a whole different deal here.
Okay.
But we can go into that. So going off of that, the number one thing you'll always hear as you approach hurricane season is going to be thin your trees.
Yep.
Okay. You're going to hear it a million times in this industry. Okay. The ISA, which is the International Society of Arboriculture, that's who we're certified under. They have basically outlawed the term thinning. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And when I tell everybody that, usually their eyes get pretty big.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because
that's the name of the game. Yeah. Okay. Because when you thin your tree out, you're increasing wind flow throughout the canopy in theory. Okay. Mm-hmm. Well, the problem is you're blanketing all trees with that term. And for me, it all comes down to species. Okay. Which trees do we need to thin more than others? Quote, what thinning used to be was going in, you're thinning the internal canopy of the tree to allow for more wind flow. Problem with that is you're, number one, you're taking away food source, which is your leaves. Okay. Mm-hmm. It's where your cooking's going on. You're photosynthesizing. Number two, which is the big one, you're pushing the energy out to the ends of the branches, which we definitely don't want. That's what we're trying to alleviate. Okay. Mm-hmm. And what we found is, and again, going into another topic here, by being a certified arborist, you have to, like most things, you have to acquire continued education throughout the years to keep your license, because everything constantly changes. Okay. So thinning back 10 years ago was the name of the game. But what they've found now, because they do constant studies on this stuff, is that you want to try to keep those internal branches, because all trees work better with all of their limbs, kind of like a human. If you were to remove an arm or a limb and I get hit with a force, I'm going to react differently.
Whole center of gravity's
off. I'm going to play different, right? Yep. So these trees are going to react differently as well. So they've actually coined the term lion's tailing on a tree, when you scalp the internal canopy, leaving the end of the branch like a lion's tail.
Yep.
Okay. So we try to stay away from that. So that's a big thing that I really try to educate my clients on, in not thinning out your trees and really focusing on where all the heavy weight is on those branches.
Got it. Where that's interesting, because even now, this is the first time I'm actually hearing, where we've always heard about thinning, where get the airflow through. And I mean, I've seen people hire someone to do exactly that last year. I didn't know that. And as far as we were just talking earlier, it seems like we're seeing more and more hurricanes recently, and more than anything, we're seeing more and more rainfall. And it seems like just in the last year, a lot of trees that I've grown up seeing from my own naive eyes, they seem very healthy, very solid. And they went down, and once the root ball came on up, you can just see it's this sloppy mess. Where are you seeing changes where softening of soil with rain is kind of changing the approach?
Well, again, it all depends on the species of tree.
Yeah. Okay.
It depends which tree you're dealing with. So as far as oak trees go, your most common is going to be your live oak and your laurel oak. Okay. That's kind of like, the two brothers you're going to see or hear about the most. I mean, you have all different species of oak trees, but the main difference with those two trees is their root structure. Okay. Your live oaks are going to be much more deep rooted, much more anchored. Okay. Laurel oaks are much more surface root oriented. Okay. So most of the time, not all the time, but a lot of the time, the trees that you see the root ball sticking 10 feet out of the ground sideways is most of the time
they're never that trees.
Deep. Right. Okay?
Never seen a cypress go down.
Right. And I mean, hey, for that matter, camphor trees, okay, the invasive pest of a tree, that everybody likes to talk about, which in my opinion, right tree, right place. Okay. Just because it's invasive doesn't mean it's a trash tree or anything like that, because believe it or not, camphor trees are a very deep rooted tree. Similar to a live oak, they are brittle and they do make a mess, but you rarely see a full-blown camphor tree uproot out of the ground.
Yep.
So with that being said, again, it's all right tree, right place. Okay. Yep. And when we're talking about homes and walking properties and preparing for hurricane season, again, 90% of this comes down to species. Okay. Because again, if I have, a laurel oak that's 10 feet off the house, half the canopy covering over the house, I may get a little bit more aggressive than I would say on a live oak tree that we know is going to withstand heavy winds, heavy rain a lot better than the laurel oak. So again, you just can't, my biggest thing is you can't blanket all these trees with one term. You know what I mean? Go thin all your trees. You know what I mean? You have to take account for the species of tree.
It's very situation based.
Very situational.
And if your world is anything like mine, sometimes I get the call to help out after mistakes have already been made and you get called to correct them. In your world, what are the most common mistakes you see homeowners make?
Well, I see it depends if we're, did the homeowners plant the trees? You know what I mean? Did they install the trees? Did they have them installed? Have they been pruning them on their own? Things like that. But I would say that the biggest thing that I see is either, say a particular tree's planted too close to the house, like say a live oak tree, again, with a bigger root plate. You want to try to be at least 20, 25 feet off the house or structure.
Yep.
Okay. When you're dealing with more of a light rooted tree, say, maybe a ligustrum tree or a tababuia tree or something of that nature, you can be a little bit closer up on the house, in your landscape. Improper pruning practices, again, when they start to thin their trees out or, even as simple as when you're mulching around your trees, that you always want to be able to see the root flare of the tree, which is going to be where it starts to flare out towards the bottom.
Yep.
Okay. You don't want to pack that mulch real tight on it or ground cover for that fact, because that can cause a chemical burn on the tree. You never want a tree to look like a telephone pole.
Yep.
Okay. Sticking out of the ground. So, those are a couple. And then I would say again, just on it all depends on who's coming to your house and who's pruning your trees. You know what I mean? You need somebody that one, you're going to be comfortable with. They're knowledgeable, certified arborist, preferably, and then of course, based on referrals or recommendations, do your research. So I can't say I've seen a ton of homeowner mistakes per se, but I have seen jobs that have been done.
Got it.
That, could have been done.
Hired someone you probably shouldn't have hired. Yeah. And as far as, I like that you mentioned sometimes the mistakes happen, well, with some of these trees, might have been 50 years ago. If somebody is looking to, plant new trees, do they give you or an arborist a call to determine location, species, or are you mostly involved once the tree's in the ground and kind of established?
Generally speaking, I work close with a lot of nurseries, a lot of landscape nurseries that specialize in that.
Yep.
Okay, so most of the time we come in after the fact. Once they're planted, tree training, if you will, starts immediately. Okay, whether we're dropping some of the lower branches, but as far as the installation goes, these landscape architects, we stay in our own lane. They're artists at what they do, and we let them have that. You know what I mean? Now, that being said, I do walk properties every day, and when I do have clients that will ask me, hey, what tree might be best suited here or there, or whatever the case, I can recommend. Nice thing about nurseries, like I tell a lot of people, is you can go there and they can show you. You know what I mean?
Yep.
They have all these trees, and you can really, because I'm a visual guy. You know what I mean? So I have to be able to see that. So I can rattle off trees all day long, or even show them pictures.
Yep.
But at the end of the day, when they can see them, you know what I mean, in person, it's different. So, that's what I would say.
Got it. And steering it a little bit more towards the real estate world and adding or identifying value. One of my favorite experiences have been representing buyers that are experts in a very particular real estate related field. Civil engineers are fascinating because you get to see through their lens, and they want to see the floor plan and architectural drawings and get in the attic and and they just mention and see things that as a real estate agent, you're supposed to be jack of all trades and be able to identify problems that you should call the expert on.
Correct.
Contractors are also interesting, interior designers, and seeing, their lens of what could be done with the property is fascinating. If you were a buyer, what would you be looking for or looking out for when purchasing a house?
Sure. So in my experience in buying a home, the first thing I do is, again, I'm looking at safety. Okay. Number one, before I'm looking at aesthetics. So, I would say the first thing I'm looking at are trees around the house, obviously. Okay. I'm looking at how close the trees are within proximity to the house. Okay. Tree specific, how does that root play do, within X amount of feet from the house? Okay. Limbs overreaching the house. How do these trees react? My number one thing would be, do we have trees in groups? Okay. Do we have isolated trees? Because trees in groups are always going to buffer out the high winds better than an isolated tree. And I always try to convince clients out of removing trees, especially when you're taking them out of a group, because that's going to subject that next tree to that much more wind force. Okay. So that would be the number one thing that I'm looking at. And again, then you can go into aesthetics, what issues do I see 10 years down the road with these trees? You know what I mean? Are we better off replacing them now, or whatever the case? You can go into even trees that might block the sun coming up or the sun coming down in the evening, things like that. But I would say the number one thing I'm looking at is going to be safety, like most things.
Yeah. And I know, again, I bought a house with no trees nearby, where when I'm walking a property, seeing a property for the first time with a buyer, having limited knowledge, same thing. I look for distance to the house for something that if it came down, it's going to wreck some stuff. And as someone who doesn't have trees there, the energy bill, having that canopy is just huge. Or if you have a pool, how much maintenance is going to be involved with that? Now, speaking from a seller standpoint, and assuming, let's say this individual has, 2 to 4 good size oaks or mature trees, nothing of really concern being within 25 feet, but we're looking to sell the house. Real estate is a game of inches, trying to extract every cent of value you can.
Sure.
What should sellers be doing? And then make sure their realtor knows about this value. What should sellers do to get the most value out of their house in a buyer's perspective?
Well, again, you want to make sure that the property that you are selling is going to be safe for your potential buyer, right? So, again, going back into, any trees within proximity to the house, I would say, obviously, you want to pull in a certified arborist, come out, assess these trees before anything, because at the end of the day, you may not need to do anything to these trees, and there's no agenda behind that. It's like I tell everybody, I'm not going to come in here and cut what I don't need to. You know what I mean? I'm only going to make cuts on these trees because at the end of the day, every cut you make's a wound, and the tree has to heal that wound. And the longer that wound's open, moisture, rot, decay, airborne disease, etc., can set in. So, an arborist is going to look for things that the everyday home buyer or seller's not going to look for. Okay. Again, going into the canopy of the tree, looking for weak unions, for example, certain trees have weaker unions, sharper angles than others.
And what is a union?
So a union is going to be where your branches are going to meet.
Got it.
Okay. So, depending on the tree, what's been done to the tree, how it's been pruned over the years, some trees are going to have sharper unions, in which case we may want to do some weight reduction on those particular limbs. We may even want to put a support in there. You know what I mean? Just looking out, because at the end of the day, as a seller, I'm assuming you're looking out for the best interest of that client. You know what I mean? So you want to set them up with, a safe property, in terms of your trees and everything else, but again, most of the time that I go out and I look at these properties, by the end of our assessment, it's about half of what they initially expected would need to be done.
And do you frequently run into people calling you to come take a look at a particular tree, and that owner, their plan is to have it removed?
Absolutely.
They call just to say, how much would it cost to remove this tree? Where I know that's what I've experienced mostly in my experience. And what else is interesting, and we've talked about this before, I also think most homeowners would not think to give you a call unless they're looking up at their tree canopy and assuming there's an issue, a dead branch, large dead branch over the house. Really, it sounds like what you're saying is don't hesitate to reach out. There may be nothing to be done, but just having an expert eye to see the progression is key.
Correct. So, it's really invaluable, to get somebody out in a profession that you're not familiar with, which most of the time, the clients that I'm dealing with, they've never had tree work done for that matter. They've never had an arborist come out. It's all foreign to them.
Yep.
So for us, everything we're doing there is educating that customer, and I've been on numerous properties where you go out, we talk about the trees, we have a 30-minute long conversation and assessment, and at the end of the day, call me in 6 months.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. Let's see what happens.
Let's revisit. Okay. And even if it's minor, whatever it is, but to your point with most a number of clients basically calling me out for the removal of a tree. I can't tell you how many I walk up and they say, hey, I got this tree in the back. I got a dead tree I need taken out.
Yep.
And I go back there and I look and it's a live oak tree, a southern live oak.
Yeah.
And I tell you, I said, where's the dead tree? And they said, well, it's right here. I said, that's the strongest tree you have on your property. He said, well, why doesn't it look like the tree in the front? Well, the tree in the front's a laurel oak.
Yeah.
Your laurel oak's going to bloom out a lot thicker and a lot more flush than your live oak trees. They're naturally a thinner tree.
Yep.
Then their eyes start opening up and they're going, wait a minute, you mean I can keep this tree? I said, of course. I said, we need to do some mitigation pruning to it.
Yep.
Okay. 90% of the time, there's always a mitigation strategy.
Yep.
Opposed to removal. Removal is always going to be the last option. When it becomes a safety threat or concern to people and or property, that's when we have to make a move. But I'm telling you, 90% of the time, we can mitigate. There's other options.
Got it. And what are the most common causes for issues that you see? Is it pest? Is it just getting too big or too much growth or disease?
You do have your pests. You have your wood boring insects like your southern pine beetle. You do have your diseases. You have your improper pruning methods. There's so many different aspects you can look at this from. But I would say that as far as the trees growing too big, not necessarily. Because as long as you can, I would say maybe every year or two, as long as you can have a certified arborist come in there, take a look at these trees, do the proper pruning methods that they need to. And that doesn't necessarily mean downsizing the tree, but training it properly. Okay. Reduction pruning where it's needed, taking the weight back where it's needed, not topping your trees. Okay. Topping is something I steer away from all day long. Okay. Because anytime you do that, you're going to support unnecessary growth and you're going to turn straight structural leaders or branches into about 10 sucker branches. As those branches get bigger, they form weak unions or connections, making them very susceptible to failure.
Got it.
In high winds. So we really try to let the tree be a tree, and at most you do some weight reduction pruning and you just train the tree from there.
Got it.
Yeah.
And I think we had a chat about this maybe a couple weeks ago, and I've run into it enough. I know we need to talk about it. How do you handle trimming or removal of a tree that is smack dab on a shared property line? What does that process look like from your standpoint?
You mean just logistically?
Logistically.
Right. So most of the time that you're dealing with a situation like that, where you do have assets, all around the tree, whether it's houses, fences, AC units, you name it. Typically in a situation like that, if possible, we're going to bring a crane in. Okay. And we're going to strategically remove the tree piece by piece. That way we're just hoisting the limbs and lumber out rather than roping and rigging down, which you can do. But keep in mind, most of the time you're doing that, you're putting load on the tree, which is what we definitely don't want when you have assets within reach, right? So that's generally going to be the safest way to go about that.
Got it.
Assuming you have the access for the equipment.
And I know I've witnessed this plenty of times, and my guess is you would advise against it. What are your thoughts when you say, let's say we have a property on a shared line, or let's say we have a tree that's on one person's yard that has a bunch of overhang over to another person's yard, and that neighbor starts lopping off and trimming back not equally. Is that an area of concern?
Oh boy, yeah, we can get real deep into this one. So, state specific.
Yep.
Okay, so in the state of Florida, you have an imaginary line on that property line
Yep.
that goes all the way up and all the way down. Okay, whatever's over that property line, you own. Okay, whether that's the trees on your property, the limbs are on your property, regardless.
Yep.
Okay, so what you have to remember is no matter what, whether that tree starts in the neighbor's yard and ends up in your yard, you've now adopted that. Okay, so you're responsible for whatever comes over that property line.
Yep.
So that's your right/responsibility to maintain that.
Yep.
Okay, now that being said, you can do frankly whatever you please on that side of the property, because at the end of the day, whatever happens is going to be your responsibility, whether that's root plate,
Yep.
whether it's limbs. Okay, now all this being said, and I deal with this subject on a weekly basis,
I bet.
we do things in an ethical manner.
Yeah.
Okay, we're not going to get in. No, we're not going to come in and we're not just going to flat wall these limbs to the property line.
Yeah.
We're going to
Put all the weight on one side of the tree.
correct.
Yeah.
Okay, because at the end of the day, what you have to remember is, even if you do that and you take all the limbs up on that property line, that tree is still within reaching distance of your home should something happen.
Yep.
So the last thing we want to do is make this tree more of a hazard than it was before.
Yep.
So if we can go in, keep the canopy, make it safer, mitigation pruning, like I said earlier, get some weight off of it, clean it up a little bit. Overall, we're gonna keep the tree a tree, and we're gonna make it a safer situation overall.
Yep.
And most of the time, we're doing this, or whatever we do on the neighboring property's tree, we're not doing enough to where we need to go on the other property. For symmetrical purposes.
Yep.
Okay, we really never get that drastic to go that far anyway.
Yep. And in closing, and this may be a state specific question, maybe it's national. If somebody is looking to hire an arborist, they haven't been referred to someone, they don't know anyone, no one has a referral for them, they're just going in blind. How should someone find an arborist, and how should they qualify them as an expert that they can trust for maintaining their trees?
Sure. So the number one thing you want to do, obviously, I would say referrals if you can. If you can't, that's when you start doing your research. Okay. You can either go on ISA's website, the International Center of Arboriculture, and you can look them up by area code, or do your Google researching, do your local next door app. That's a big one that people started referring to, just because it's very neighborhood specific, and see who everybody's using. The thing I like about that next door app is that they're threads. You know what I mean? It's not just reviews. Okay, they're threads.
Conversations.
They're conversations. So multiple people have used them, or they're second that, third that. You know what I mean?
Yep.
So that would be my number one.
That's a good tip.
Once you can find somebody, you bring them out. That's when you start to vet them.
Yep.
At the end of the day, just like anybody, when they come out to your house, you got to be comfortable with them. Okay. People are they're going to work with people they like.
Yep.
Okay. So just because 4, 5, 10 other people have used them, you have to be comfortable with that particular person for the job. Okay. Because the thing about this industry is it's tricky because there's so many different opinions out there, and everybody has different approaches to trees. Okay. Because there's not one set way to do it. And I'm not saying that other ways are wrong per se, but there's so many different ways that you can approach these things. So some people are going to be a lot more conservative than others. Some people are going to be a lot more aggressive. So I would say once you feel comfortable with them, then you start vetting them out a little bit.
Yep.
Get to see their credentials, make sure they're licensed, bonded, workers' compensation, so on and so forth. And then from there, you get their overall assessment of the property. And like anything, if it's your first time doing this, or your first time having an arborist out, you want to at least get 3 bids. Make sure they're, get your apples to apples. And, at the end of the day, you want to make sure everybody's somewhat in line, not only numbers wise, but knowledge-wise as well.
Got it. Well, thank you so much for joining the podcast. And if you are in need of any tree services in Central Florida, please give Austin Tollman a call with word of mouth tree services, and I'll include his contact information in the description below. Thank you again.